Hey guys, tonight we take a slow, dusty walk into a world where flour floats like ghosts in the air, the wooden beams groan with secrets, and the millstones never truly stop turning. You're stepping into the life of a medieval miller, someone who's either grinding grain or being ground down by it. You're wrapped in the darkness of pre-dawn, following a winding dirt path toward a watermill, its wheel creaking like it's been complaining for centuries. The air smells damp, like old bread and wet stone, and the trees loom like suspicious onlookers. The mill appears suddenly from the mist, squat and hunched like it knows something you don't. Its thatched roof is slightly caved on one side, and the wooden door is always a bit ajar, like someone, or something, forgot to close it behind them. You might think grinding wheat sounds like one of the less dramatic jobs of the Middle Ages, but you'd be dead wrong. Or maybe just dead, depending on the night. The truth is, the medieval mill is no quiet corner of peasantry. It's a strange mix of economics, danger, superstition, and yes, the occasional ghost in the grain. You probably won't survive this if you're allergic to flour, darkness, or irrational fear of wooden stairs that creak way too much. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. I always love reading those. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You push the door open with a long creak, and inside the mill, it's cooler than it should be. Your breath ghosts slightly in front of you, and you wonder if it's the early hour or something else entirely. Grain dust hangs in the air like fog, thicker than you imagined. It sticks to your eyelashes, coats your throat, and clings to your clothes like the building's trying to remember you. You tread across wooden floorboards worn smooth by years of labor and bare feet. The great grindstones sit in the center, dormant for now, but always vaguely humming. You're not sure if it's real or just in your bones. In the corner, sacks of wheat lean at tired angles. You swear one shifts slightly, but maybe that was just the flicker of the oil lamp you lit. Or maybe not. Being a miller in the Middle Ages was a weird mix of practical skill and subtle dread. Sure, you ground wheat, kept the locals fed, and took your small cut, usually more than you were supposed to. That's where the reputation started. Millers were often seen as shady, the kind of folks who might shortchange a widow on her flour or slip an extra handful into their own pot. Some of that was just envy. After all, the miller usually had nicer boots than the blacksmith, and that stirred the village gossip like a spoon in stew. But it wasn't just money that made people uneasy about millers. It was the solitude. Mills were often outside the village, by necessity, built near water for power or on hills for wind. That meant millers spent long hours alone, often overnight, listening to the strange acoustics of turning wood and rushing water. It didn't help that their buildings moaned, shifted, and occasionally bled flour from the cracks like ghostly smoke. Historians still argue whether the fear of millers was superstition born of isolation or a reaction to real economic tensions. After all, no one likes the guy who controls the food supply and cheats at dice. You move deeper into the building. There's a narrow staircase leading to the loft, where grain waits to drop into the grinding mechanism. Up there, it's even darker, even quieter. Every step creaks like it's trying to warn you. Your lantern throws shadows that move too much. You tell yourself it's nothing. You always tell yourself it's nothing, right before the door downstairs closes itself. A soft thump below. Not loud, not urgent, just enough to remind you you're not really alone. Not ever. Medieval millers got used to these sounds. They had to. Otherwise, the job would eat them alive. You hear it again. A rustle. Maybe a rat. Or maybe the spirit of that one baker who never got his flour on time. You reach the top of the stairs and see rows of grain sacks stacked like sleeping bodies. It smells dry, sweet, and strangely warm, considering the chill below. A wind stirs, even though the shutters are closed. You notice a sack twitch, not spill, just twitch, like someone inside shifted in their sleep. No one said it was a haunted mill. That would be absurd. But plenty of people talk about mills like they talk about crossroads or graveyards, thin places, places where things leak through. There's a story in the local village of a miller who never spoke. They said he once saw something in the flower chute and refused to say what it was. After that, he wore a charm of bones and ash around his neck and kept a rooster inside the mill for company. Not for eggs, not even for noise, just company. That rooster disappeared one night. The next morning, the miller's boots were found on the stairs, but not the miller. Most people in town said it was probably wolves or tax collectors. You step back from the grain sacks, suddenly aware of how far you are from the village, from anyone. You head back down the stairs, the boards groaning like a complaint. When you reach the ground floor again, the grindstones have shifted ever so slightly. Not spinning, just rotated. You're pretty sure they weren't like that before. You brush your hands on your trousers, only to find white flour already coating your fingertips. You haven't touched anything. You blink at the flour on your fingers. You haven't touched the sacks. You haven't ground a single grain. And yet, the fine white dust is there, clinging like it always belonged to you. That's the thing about medieval mills. They don't just process wheat. They process time. They process memory. They sift reality until it's hard to tell what's a creaky beam and what's a cry for help. As the morning refuses to arrive, you explore the space more cautiously. Every corner of the mill seems to have its own mood. One side feels warmer, another distinctly colder, like someone left a window open to the next world. You find old tools scattered near the base of the grindstone, a wooden paddle, a cracked scoop, and a rusted lantern that hasn't held a flame since the last plague. You start to notice that things in the mill seem to move ever so slightly when you look away. The scoop that was definitely leaning against the wall now lies flat on the floor. You don't remember hearing it fall. You just know it has. Being a medieval miller was never just about grinding flour. It was about surviving the isolation, the suspicion, and most of all, the strangely persistent feeling that you weren't alone, even when you swore you locked the door behind you. Your hands, now ghostly white with flour, remind you of the one job you came here to do. Keep the stones turning, feed the village, and don't ask too many questions. That last part's important, because the more you ask, the more you hear. And the more you hear, well, that's how you end up like Old Tom. Old Tom was a miller who lived 2 generations ago, according to village gossip anyway. He wasn't born into the job. He won it, in a dice game, which should have been a warning. Tom wasn't exactly loved by the village. He took more flour than fair, shouted at widows, and once punched a vicar during a midsummer dance. And yet, no one could deny he ran the mill with ruthless efficiency. The grindstones never stopped under Tom, not even when the river froze. They say he started hearing voices not long after the winter of '53. First, just murmurs, then laughter, then crying. The kind that sticks behind your ears, even after the sound's gone. One night, he ran to the tavern barefoot, screaming that the flour was breathing. Not alive, breathing, like lungs beneath the floorboards. The village priest came the next day, sprinkled holy water, said all the right words. But Tom wouldn't go back inside. He slept in the cow shed after that. The mill kept turning, though. No one was there, but flour still piled up in the bins every morning. The river wheel groaned through the night, even when the stream barely trickled. Eventually, a new miller took over. They found Tom's boots in the loft. Never found Tom. Historians still argue whether tales like Old Tom's were metaphors for mental illness, stress-induced hallucinations, or exaggerated folk tales used to enforce social norms. Because let's face it, telling your kids, "Don't steal flour or the ghost in the bin will take you," is way more effective than just asking nicely. And speaking of flour, let's talk about what this stuff really does to a person. If you've ever baked, you know flour gets everywhere. Now imagine breathing it in daily, for hours. It coats your lungs, sticks in your eyelashes, and settles into the folds of your brain. Medieval millers suffered from a condition we'd now call baker's lung, chronic inflammation from inhaling too much fine dust, hallucinations, coughing fits, fatigue, a few too many sleepless nights in a room that smells like stale wheat and ghosts, and you start seeing shapes that shouldn't be there. But still, millers worked through it. Why? Because despite the isolation and suspicion, being a miller paid better than most jobs. You controlled the food, and with it, the power. You could skim a little. A handful here, a pinch there. The village might mutter, but they needed you more than they hated you. Usually. Some millers took things further. There are records of millers using trick chutes and hidden compartments to steal from customers. One was caught when the trapdoor under his grindstone collapsed under a donkey. Not subtle. Another used a second sack with a false bottom to collect the extra. But of course, when these tricks were discovered, the millers blamed ghosts, or mischievous fairies, or angry ancestors who wanted their cut. Which brings us to the real reason people feared millers. It wasn't just because they cheated, it was because they were other. They lived apart. They talked to machines that groaned and spun. They stayed awake when others slept. And in a world where darkness meant danger, being alone in a wooden building full of whispering grain made you either brave or very, very foolish. You move toward the grindstone now, brushing more flour from your tunic. The stones are massive, solid, round, ancient. Imported from miles away, shaped by hand, and heavy as sin. When they spin, they hum, not loudly, just enough that your ears tune to it like a lullaby you forgot. Some millers claimed the stones could speak if you listened close, not in words, but in rhythms. Some even claimed to know what they were saying. That's usually when people stopped visiting that mill. As you kneel beside the chute, you notice a rat dart past, standard fare in a building filled with grain. But this one doesn't run toward food. It runs toward the shadows and disappears. You don't move. There's a quiet now, not silence, just less, as if something important just stepped away. You hear a creak upstairs again. Could be the wind, could be time catching up. You don't check. You've learned not to already. Instead, you settle onto a small wooden stool beside the chute. Take a deep breath of flour-thick air, and try not to think about the fact that every single medieval mill had a story about a paddle that moved on its own. You know, like the one now leaning ever so slightly closer to you than it was when you first walked in. You don't stand. You don't lean away. You just sit there, blinking slowly, like maybe the flour dust will blur the paddle back to where it should be. But no, there it is, still. And now, the hairs on your arms are awake, rising one by one like little flour-coated antennae. The paddle hasn't fallen. It hasn't moved again. But it wants you to know it could. That's the unnerving part of working in a medieval mill. Nothing screams, nothing jumps out. It's all suggestion, like an over-polished whisper you didn't quite catch. A murmur in the grain room, a shadow between the rafters, a paddle that doesn't follow the laws of gravity. These were not unusual experiences for millers. In fact, many of them expected it, because mills weren't just noisy places filled with flour and wooden gears. They were stories, built plank by plank. Everyone had heard them. Everyone had their own. You lean back, trying to relax your spine, and listen. The grain room behind you sighs. That's where most of the strange stories start. The grain room, a tight little loft above the stones where sacks of wheat wait for their turn to become someone's next meal. It's where you store the harvest. Let it breathe. Keep it dry. But in the still hours of the night, when the mill is dark and the only light comes from a flickering lantern or the dim glow of the moon through warped glass, that grain doesn't just sit. It settles. It whispers. Or, at least, that's how it feels when your ears are too full of silence. Millers often claim to hear voices in the grain room, not loud, not angry, just hushed, overlapping whispers, like a crowd murmuring prayers in reverse. You might think that's ridiculous, just the wind between the boards. But it happened too often, too consistently, and always at the same times, after midnight, just before dawn, and, most eerily, during long droughts. When the grain was low, the whispers were loudest. One miller's journal, preserved more by accident than design, noted that the sacks breathe when the sky hasn't wept. A poetic way of saying, when the crops are bad, the mill gets weird. Theories range from simple superstition to the slightly more interesting idea that grain, in large quantities, actually moves as it settles, producing soft pops, cracks, and creaks that mimic human speech. But if that's the case, Why did those sounds sometimes call your name? Historians still debate whether these tales were exaggerated warnings meant to discourage theft, or a genuine psychological effect from extended isolation, lack of sleep, and mild flour poisoning. Some even suggest that exposure to naturally occurring molds in stored grain might have contributed to hallucinations. Ergot, the notorious fungus that grows on rye, is well known for causing everything from tingling limbs to full-blown hysteria. Fun fact, it's also one of the suspected causes behind witchcraft accusations in several parts of Europe. So yes, the bread might have been cursed after all. You reach for a grain sack, maybe just to test the weight, and your fingers press into it like it's breathing. Not soft, not mushy, just responsive. You yank your hand back and smile nervously. Joking to yourself now, must be one of those haunted harvests. You say it aloud, half expecting someone to laugh behind you. No one does. The flour in the air begins to shift slightly, as though caught in a breeze. But you feel no wind. You tell yourself, like millers have done for centuries, that you're imagining it. And maybe you are. Or maybe not. The strange thing about mills is they exist in a kind of permanent twilight zone. Mechanical but mystical, dusty but sacred. In medieval Europe, many communities believed that wheat had a soul. You harvest it too roughly, and you disturb that soul. You grind it with bad intent, and the bread turns bitter, or worse. That belief trickled into everyday behavior. Before grinding a fresh harvest, some millers would knock gently on the side of the stone, whispering an apology. Others sprinkled salt across the floor, a kind of peace offering or protection spell. Still others hung bits of iron, keys, nails, or horseshoes above the door. Superstition? Absolutely. But when your job is to work all night in a building where the floor sometimes knocks back, you welcome any excuse to carry a lucky charm. There's a lull now. The room stills. Even the flour in the air seems to pause, like it's listening. And in that thick, almost sacred quiet, you swear you hear something upstairs. Not footsteps, not speech, just breathing, heavy, slow, and not yours. You know what that means, don't you? You're not alone in the mill, and you never were. Back in the village, folks share a tale about a young miller's apprentice named Leif. He was bright, cheerful, and utterly fearless, until he spent 3 nights in the grain loft, guarding a valuable shipment after a season of thefts. On the 3rd night, Leif came down changed. Pale, distant, barely blinking. He refused to speak of what happened. He never returned to the mill. Years later, he told a priest, under heavy drink, that the grain sacks whispered truths, not threats, not lies. Truths, the kind no person should hear. The priest laughed. The next morning, his barn burned down. Make of that what you will. You shake your head, trying to clear it. The air is too thick, too heavy with breath and dust. You walk to the door, just for a bit of fresh air, and find it slightly open. Which is strange, because you remember closing it. You always close it. You lean against the doorway, looking out toward the waterwheel. Still, the water trickles lazily, reflecting the silver light of a pale moon. You'd think this place would be peaceful. It should be peaceful. But even the quiet here feels watched. You think of the millstones again, those massive discs of stone, designed to crush, to grind, to erase. They have no memory, and yet the room remembers. Every breath, every shout, every whisper. You step back inside, close the door, and bolt it firmly. The whispering stops. For now. You lean against the bolted door, heart slowing, breath catching up with you like a slightly annoyed friend who warned you not to come in here alone. The whispering in the grain loft has stopped, but in a way that feels less like silence and more like waiting. Still, you have work to do. And like every good medieval miller, you know the rules. Don't let fear stop the stones. If the grind halts, people go hungry. And if people go hungry, they start asking uncomfortable questions about demons, about blighted wheat, about why your hair is going white at the edges even though you're only 25. You glance at the grindstone again. Still, heavy, solid. But the chute above it, the one that should feed the flour down like a lazy snowfall, it's twitching, just slightly, like the wood is breathing. No big deal, right? Maybe it's the grain shifting, or maybe it's something else. Now, here's where it gets interesting. See, back in the Middle Ages, it wasn't just peasants and priests who believed grain could carry spirits. Even some scholars and minor nobility held that seeds, once reaped from the earth, retained a fragment of the divine or the diabolical, depending on how you treated the land. To grind wheat improperly was to anger the spirit in the stalk. To waste flour? Practically a sin. That's why many mills had small altars tucked into corners, often hidden behind a sack or beneath a tool bench. Just a candle, maybe a carved wheat sheaf, something to keep the spirits agreeable. And yes, sometimes offerings were made. You look around now, wondering if the previous miller left something like that behind. A coin under a beam? A crust of bread balanced somewhere odd? Nothing obvious. But the mill smells faintly of beeswax and smoke, and you can't remember lighting any more than one lantern. There's a tale from Eastern Europe, Poland maybe, or Bohemia, about a spirit called the Zhitny Dush, or rye ghost. According to legend, this spirit follows the grain wherever it goes, from field to mill, mill to oven, oven to belly. If disrespected, it spoils flour, cracks millstones, and sometimes whispers your secrets to the townsfolk. Fun. One miller, apparently, tried to outwit the spirit by soaking the grain in garlic water. He vanished within a week. His replacement found only a small pile of garlic cloves on the stairs. Historians still argue whether these tales were thinly veiled morality plays. Respect your tools, respect your food. Or whether they reflect a genuine tradition of animistic belief tied to agricultural cycles. Either way, the results were the same: fear, caution, and a whole lot of ritualized knocking on wood. Literally. Millers would knock on the chute before pulling the lever, just a polite tap. A, "Hello, I'm here," but also a, "Please don't curse me or my grandchildren." You try it now. Tap, tap. The chute shudders slightly, then settles. Flower starts to fall. Not fast, not loud, just a gentle, continuous drift, like snow, like ash, like sleep. You watch it pile up in the wooden basin below, slow and rhythmic, and you almost forget everything strange. Almost. Then you hear it again. Footsteps. Above. Only, no, not footsteps exactly. More like a slow dragging, like someone, or something, with one bad leg and one heavy boot. You freeze, hand still resting on the lever. Don't look up, you think. Old rule. Never look up unless you have to. Instead, you focus on the grindstone. It's spinning now. Softly, obediently. A good stone. You press your fingers against the edge of the basin, the flour cool and strangely silky. Some millers said if you pressed your hand into a fresh mound of flour and saw no impression, it meant something else had already claimed it. You pull your hand away just in case. Remember old Margot? Of course you don't, but the village does. She was a widow who worked a hilltop windmill after her husband died mysteriously during a thunderstorm. People said she was too beautiful to mourn, too cheerful for a grieving wife. So, naturally, they assumed witchcraft. What really unnerved them, though, wasn't her smile. It was her flower. Always white. Always perfect. Even when storms drowned the wheat or beetles infested every other bag in town, Margot's flour came out pristine. They said her grindstone had a secret, that it wasn't stone at all, but bone, carved into a perfect disc. Cow bone, horse bone, human. No one dared check. When she vanished one night, the townsfolk tore apart the mill in search of dark relics. All they found was a basin full of flour, perfectly shaped into a smile. You're not thinking about that now, of course. Definitely not. You're a practical miller, logical, mostly. You glance up anyway. Nothing. Just rafters, dust motes, and a rope swing for adjusting the grain chute. But now the footsteps are below you, behind the wall. Inside the wall. You don't check. Smart. Instead, you pull the lever just a little more, increasing the flow. The grindstone hums louder now, not angrily, more like a lullaby, repetitive, soft, almost hypnotic. Another fun medieval belief. If the stones grind in rhythm with your heartbeat, you're safe. If they grind slower, something's watching. If they grind faster, something's hunting. Right now, the rhythm matches yours, just barely. You glance at your lantern. The flame flickers once, twice, and then steadies. That's the signal, isn't it? Time to get through the night. Time to focus on the work. You grab the broom, begin sweeping the flour into sacks, careful not to let too much escape. Waste invites attention. One of the mill's older carvings, half worn away near the stairs, depicts a little figure made of grain, kneeling before a millstone. No one knows what it means. Maybe a warning. Maybe a prayer. Either way, you sweep a little gentler now. Behind you, something creaks again. You don't turn around. Just tighten your grip on the broom. The footsteps, wherever they are, fade. For now, you stay perfectly still. The broom in your hands rests mid-sweep, bristles hovering just above the soft, flower-coated floor. That dragging footstep sound, gone again, as if it was never there. But you heard it. And more importantly, it knew you heard it. There's a kind of understanding between millers and whatever else shares their walls. You pretend it doesn't exist, and maybe, just maybe, it lets you finish your shift. You start sweeping again. Slow, even strokes, quiet as possible. The flour is warm in places, cold in others. That's normal, right? Maybe the wood underneath holds heat differently. Maybe something recently passed by. Millers in the medieval world often worked deep into the night. It wasn't romantic or poetic. It was simply necessary. The waterwheel doesn't run on sunlight after all. It runs on water, and water doesn't care about your sleep schedule. If the current is good at 2 a.m., you grind at 2 a.m., and you hope nothing knocks while you do. And yet, things knock. Always. They don't bang. They knock. Polite. Timed. Thoughtful. You hear it now. 3 short raps against the side wall of the mill. Not near the door. Not near any visible beam. Just somewhere deep in the wood. Tap. 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 You freeze again. Flour-dusted fingers clenched around the broomstick. The knocking doesn't come again. You exhale, and the grindstone creaks behind you. Just a normal shift in weight, you tell yourself. Just the stone doing its job. In medieval folklore, knocking was a sign. Sometimes death. Sometimes warning. A tap on the wall could mean an angry spirit passing through, or it could mean a warning from a helpful one. Differentiating between them was part of the job. Some millers carried small charms, pieces of rowan wood, silver thimbles, or wax seals from the church. Others relied on routine, the same number of broom strokes, the same route around the stones, never skipping steps. One miller in France was known for always turning twice on the threshold before stepping inside. He said it disoriented whatever followed him home. You sweep in circles now, almost without thinking, your mind drifting. You remember that the old mill ledger, tucked in a drawer beneath the grain counter, contains more than numbers. Notes from previous millers, strange ones, scribbled in the margins. Not about inventory, about behavior. The mill's behavior. One note reads, "If the sacks breathe too heavily, open a window." Another says, "Don't talk back to the grindstone. It remembers tone." And one, half erased by age and flour dust, "When you hear the wheel turn backward, don't look outside." You're not thinking about that yet. That's for another hour, another section. For now, you're dealing with knockings, with cold air that shouldn't exist, with shadows that appear without cause and fade too slowly. There's an old trick passed down among millers, to test whether the knocking is external or inside the grain. Toss a pinch of flour where you heard it. If it scatters sharply, it's wind. If it falls straight down, it's something else. You grab a handful now and toss it gently into the air near the wall. It drops like a stone. You don't move. Back in the day, villagers used to say that ghosts preferred mills over graveyards. They liked the movement, the rhythm, the constant churn of matter becoming something else. That's all a ghost is, really. Matter that refuses to change, refuses to settle. So where better to haunt than a place where everything is ground and reshaped? Historians still argue whether these ideas were born from religious belief, pagan leftovers, or just sleep-deprived nonsense. But one thing is certain. Mills were widely considered liminal spaces, half sacred, half cursed, buildings that worked, but only if you never asked why. You lean against the table now, eyes closing for a moment, just for a breath. The hum of the grindstone is steady, calming. You feel your shoulders drop. You're fine. You're tired, that's all. Then you feel it. A single grain of wheat, dropped from somewhere above, lands on your arm. It's warm. You look up. Nothing. No open chute, no cracked sack. Just ceiling. Just beams. You brush the grain away and try not to read too much into it. Because here's the truth. Not everything strange in a mill is supernatural. Some of it is just the human body reacting to dust, isolation, fear. Long hours, poor light, and the constant hum of grinding can do weird things to your perception. That's what you tell yourself. That's what everyone tells themselves. Until the knockings start again. This time, louder, closer. You walk slowly toward the source. South wall, near the ladder. The wall's solid, unpainted, unremarkable. You raise a hand, press your palm flat against the wood. Warm. You step back. Millers sometimes swore that spirits moved through the walls, not like ghosts, more like mold, slow, silent, growing in unseen directions until they reached the grindstone. And then they waited for someone to make a mistake. That's why older mills had mirrors. Tiny, round, tarnished things tucked into corners, not to see yourself, but to see what wasn't you. You glance at the one by the stair now, curved, dusty, but intact. Nothing there but flour and your own pale, tired face. But your face isn't the one you're worried about. You return to the grindstone, the flour now piling steadily, humming like it always has. You check the wheel mechanism, all in place. The sack above is half empty. Good. Almost done. That's when you hear the rope creak. Not the grindstone, not the gears. The rope. The one tied to the hoist. It's swaying slightly now, side to side, like someone gave it a playful tug. And there's no breeze. You don't go near it. You go back to sweeping, to breathing, to not thinking about the knockings or the dragging steps or the warm grain that shouldn't have fallen. You sweep in a circle, then another, then another. The mill hums along, and somewhere in the flour-drenched quiet behind you, something hums back. You hum a little louder, as if matching the tone will keep the mill happy, or at least keep it from paying too much attention to you. The sound bounces gently off the beams, merging with the low grindstone rumble. You sweep flour in deliberate arcs, almost reverent now. A rhythm builds. Step, sweep, tap, step, sweep, tap. Like a quiet dance no one taught you, but that every miller somehow knows. It's easy to forget, in this cocoon of dust and creaking wood, that you're part of a long, dusty lineage. Generations of millers have moved through this exact ritual, some real, some exaggerated, all with flour in their hair and superstition in their bones. You're not special. That's what's comforting. You're just one more shadow among many. You pause at the wall again, near the sacks of freshly ground meal. There, tucked into a seam of the wood, you spot something. A faint white line, drawn in a slow, looping curve. At first glance, it's nothing. Then you lean in closer. It's chalk. A circle, roughly scrawled, with an X through the center and tiny symbols around the edges. Maybe letters, maybe something older. Millers used symbols like this: salt lines, ash crosses, carved runes, anything to keep the spirits calm or at least distracted. In northern England, millers sometimes chalked protective spirals behind the grindstone or buried iron nails beneath the doorframe. They called it warding the wheel. And in parts of Germany, millstones were actually baptized before use, blessed by priests to keep demons out of the flour. Historians still debate whether this was a holdover from pagan rituals or a practical response to the genuinely terrifying sounds mills made at night. Because mills aren't quiet. Oh no. They knock, creak, groan, shudder, sing. And when you're alone inside one with only your breath and the drumbeat of grain hitting wood, a protective symbol feels a lot more comforting than a rational explanation. You touch the chalk circle with one finger. It smudges instantly. Maybe that's fine. Maybe that's bad. Just in case, you reach into your apron pocket for the nail you keep tucked there, half rusted, curved like a question mark. You press it into the crack beneath the baseboard, gently, the way someone might tuck in a child. You don't say anything aloud, but the silence that follows feels lighter. Then comes the smell. Not smoke, not mold. Bread. Fresh, hot, yeasty bread, just out of the oven, crust browned, steam still rising. You inhale once, sharply, and then again. It makes no sense. There's no fire, no baking, just grain, just flour, just memory. It's an old legend, one whispered in bread-making towns from Flanders to Florence, that when the spirit of the mill is content, it gives you a gift, the scent of finished bread. Not real, of course, just the scent, like a promise or a lie. They say if you follow that smell, it leads you to peace or madness. Depends on who you ask. You take one step toward the scent, which seems to hover near the door you know you bolted. Then, footsteps, above you. And this time, there's no mistaking it. 2 sets, not fast, but deliberate. And they don't fade. You freeze again, spine prickling. There shouldn't be anyone up there. The grain loft is too cramped for visitors, too heavy with sacks to walk through easily. You didn't hear anyone enter. And yet, you look to the ladder. Nope. No thank you. Not tonight. Instead, you busy yourself with the flour sacks, tying one closed, brushing the top smooth. The scent of bread fades as quickly as it came. Millers often worked with their backs to walls, not just for convenience, for safety. Because when things knock, when things whisper, you want to know nothing standing behind you, except stone. In France, there's a story about a miller who kept a bell tied to the back of his apron. If anything got close enough to ring it, he'd know. He never wore it twice. You don't have a bell. You do have instinct, and right now it's humming louder than the grindstone. But you keep working. Sweep, tap, turn. Tie the sack. Straighten the chute. Whisper a thank you to the stones. Yes, out loud. You glance at the old miller's ledger again, flipped to a note written in faded ink. If the mill listens, speak kindly. If it answers, leave immediately. You close the book. Because that's the tricky part of miller life. You're always talking to the building, even when you think you're just muttering to yourself. You thank the flour. You scold the stones. You apologize when you trip on the chute rope like it was someone's foot. Over time, the mill becomes more than a workplace. It becomes something else. A partner, a witness, maybe even a judge. One final superstition floats to mind. From the Low Countries, that millers should never sleep in the mill. Not fully, not flat on their backs, not without a charm under the tongue or a sack of wheat between them and the floor. Because when you sleep in the mill, something else might try to wear you when you wake up. You glance at the stool near the grindstone. Your eyelids are heavy. No, not yet. You finish tying the last sack, stacking it against the others like little sleeping bodies. The grindstone slows gently, having done its job. The chute gives a soft final puff, then falls still. And the footsteps? Gone. For now. You lean against the grindstone, listening to its final slow rotations, the last few grains sliding through the chute like whispers drying up. The room exhales with you. Wood settling, flour drifting lazily to the floor, the whole space relaxing, for just a moment, like a beast that's eaten and now dozes in its den. But you don't relax. You've been here long enough to know that the stillness is never truly safe. It's just the pause between verses in the mill's song. That moment when the grinding stops and all the other sounds get a little louder. You start cleaning. That's what millers do. When the work ends, the scrubbing begins. You sweep flour back into the bins, wipe tools with rough cloth, check for rat holes and wet spots. Your hands move with practiced efficiency, but your ears stay tuned. Listening. Always. The mill groans slightly above you. Just the beams, maybe. Or maybe those footsteps you never investigated are shifting their weight, waiting for night to deepen. Now, you know the stories. You've heard the one about the black flour. One winter, deep in the Rhineland, a village began receiving sacks of flour so dark it looked scorched. But the grain had been clean. The stones, well maintained. No fires, no accidents. Just black flour. When villagers baked it, the loaves came out hollow. No crumb, just crust, like something had eaten the inside. They blamed the miller, naturally. He swore innocence, even invited the priest to bless the grindstone. But nothing changed. Then came the dreams. Every family who ate the black bread reported nightmares. Not grotesque ones, just repetitive. A door, a long hallway, a constant, low humming. Eventually, they stopped baking. The flour stopped turning black. The miller was never seen again. Historians still argue if the tale was a metaphor for famine-induced paranoia or possibly linked to charcoal contamination from nearby fires. But the mill's still there, apparently. Empty, quiet, locked from the inside. You check your own flower now, heart ticking a little faster, pale white, soft, normal. But still, you catch yourself staring into the basin too long, like it might blink. You shake your head, move on to the millstones. They're still warm. That's the weird thing about them. Even hours after stopping, they hold heat. Maybe it's the friction. Maybe it's something older. Some millers believe the stones had blood memory. Not literal blood, but something close. A residue. You grind enough wheat through something, it starts remembering. Not facts, not faces, just shapes, emotions, hungers. You reach for the oil can, ready to check the axle. Maintenance is everything in a mill. A jammed gear can mean disaster. And worse, it gives the spirits an excuse to speak. Old millers used to say, "Keep the wheel fed, or it starts to eat backwards." No one ever explained what that meant. They didn't have to. The oil smells of iron and garlic. You pour sparingly, wiping as you go. Each squeak of the gear feels louder now, sharper, like it's echoing somewhere it shouldn't. You glance toward the back of the room, where the shadows stretch longer than they should at this hour. And then you hear the bell. You don't have a bell, but the sound is unmistakable, soft, distant, just once. Ding. You freeze. Wait. Nothing. The bell tolls again, a little closer. In Cornwall, there's a legend of the miller's bell, a spectral chime heard only when something's entered the mill. Not through the door, through the stone, as if whatever was ground beneath it long ago has finally found a way back out. Most say it's nonsense, a myth meant to explain creaking ropes and the occasional peasant hallucination. But the bell is mentioned across dozens of regions, different names, same sound. One German folk tale speaks of der klingende Geist, the ringing spirit, a soul bound to the gear mechanisms of old mills, doomed to walk in circles, ringing once each time it completes a loop around the grinding platform. They say it appears only when the flour is cleanest, as if attracted to purity. You look at your own sacks, pristine, great. The bell rings again, once, close. You don't investigate. Instead, you return to your tools. Wipe them down. Stack them in the corner. Place the broom bristles up, handle against the wall, the traditional sign that the mill is at rest, that no work will be done until morning. And yet, the grindstone turns, just slightly, not a full rotation, a nudge, as if it remembered a debt. You look toward the ledger again. A new page is dog-eared, but you don't remember folding it. You walk over slowly, open it. There's a single sentence written in new ink. Don't let it start grinding again. No signature. You close the book. Hard. You check the grindstone lever. Still locked. The chute? Empty. Still, the air feels thicker. Like the flour isn't the only thing sifting around you now. Something else has joined it. Something slower, smarter. You sit on the stool again. Press the palms of your hands together. This is the part where the old millers prayed, not because they were religious, but because it was protocol. You say a few words, not to any god in particular, just to the mill. You thank it. You promise to treat the grain well. You ask to wake up with your own thoughts still inside your head. Then, you glance at the rope hoist again. It's not swaying anymore. It's twisted, like someone turned it from above. You stand. You reach for the nail again. Press it to your palm. Just enough to feel its weight. No bell, no footsteps. Just the steady grind of your heartbeat and the soft creak of a place that never really sleeps. You grip the nail tighter in your hand, not for protection exactly, what could an old nail really do, but for focus. Something solid, something human. The twisted hoist rope dangles like a slow question from the ceiling, and for a few long seconds, you wonder whether the mill is asking you to come upstairs, or warning you not to. Either way, you don't go. Not yet. Instead, you do what generations of millers have done when the mill gets strange. You stay busy. You head toward the waterwheel chamber, where the turning of the great wheel outside powers everything inside. The air here smells damp, wood, moss, thyme. The gentle splash of the stream outside is constant, hypnotic. You peer through the slatted boards at the wheel itself, slick with algae and turning slow and steady. This wheel, or one like it, has turned since before your grandfather's grandfather. The same force that carved valleys powers your grindstone. It's comforting in theory, until you realize that medieval villagers used to believe spirits lived in waterwheels, old river gods stuck turning forever, muttering and bubbling syllables under the spray. There's a Welsh tale about a miller who angered the wheel spirit by diverting part of the stream to water his onions. The next week, every sack of flour turned to mud, then to frogs, then back to mud. The villagers weren't thrilled. Neither was the wheel. Historians still argue whether these tales reflect pagan leftovers, personifications of nature, or if they were just vivid metaphors for the complex relationship between humanity and its technology. Either way, no miller ever messed with the water wheel unless they absolutely had to. You step carefully around the gears, checking for slippage. The wood creaks, but all seems well. You reach for the lantern to better inspect the lower frame, and that's when you notice it. Footprints. In flour. Not yours. They start near the outer door, still bolted, and lead in tight, delicate steps around the edge of the room. Bare feet. Small. Narrow. Like a child's. No one has entered. You double-check the bolt, heart tightening. Still locked. No wind. No gaps in the boards. But the footprints remain. Right there in the dust. One set in, none leading out. You follow them slowly. Around the wheel. Past the gear. To the opposite wall. And then they just stop. Like the child either vanished or stepped up into the beam itself. You place a hand on the wood. Warm again. You take a deep breath. You remember the story of the meal baby, a tale told in medieval Scotland, mostly as a warning to children who wandered too close to the mill. The story goes that sometimes, if the grindstone was left unguarded overnight, it would produce a baby, not human, but flower-born, soft-skinned, silent, and always watching. The flower baby never aged, never ate, but it wanted attention, and if ignored too long, it would sneak into your sack of meal and wait there, cold and patient, until it was carried home. The next day, your bread would taste sweet, the next, sour, the third, full of whispers. By the fourth day, you'd be gone. Some said it was just a myth, a way to keep kids from crawling into dangerous machines. But the footprints you see now, they're small, and they stop where a sack once stood, now empty. You back away, careful not to step in them. In medieval Italy, it was common to place iron shears above the grain chute, blades open, warding off spirits and malevolent energies. Some even believed flower ghosts feared sharp metal. You reach for the broom instead. It's not much, but it's long. You hold it like a staff, just in case. You make your way back to the main floor. The air feels thicker now, humid, as if the stream outside had crept in, soaking into the beams, curling around your neck. The grindstone is still, too still. Most nights, even when the stones stop, you can hear the echo of motion, the slowing hum, the dry rasp of meal shifting. But now, silence. Thick, padded silence. You reach out and press your palm to the top stone. Cold. Freezing. You step back. The air should be warmer here. Friction keeps the stones warm long after use. But now it feels like winter crawled up through the foundation. And the scent is back. Bread. Hot. Fresh. Burned. Acrid now. Sharp at the edges. Like something baking too fast. Too hot. Then you hear it. Laughter. Soft, high, distant. But inside the mill. Not a full laugh. Just the start of one. The kind you hear from a child playing a trick, or something that wants you to think it's a child. You spin. Nothing. You call out. Not loud, just enough to test the air. Hello? No answer. Just the creak of the rope hoist again. And something shifting above. Millers used to say if the laughter starts before midnight, it's a spirit just passing through. But if it comes after midnight, and the flour is cold, and the stones are silent, it's something else. You check the ledger, flip to the last page. The ink is still fresh. A new note. Leave one sack behind. For it. No signature. No explanation, just instructions. You stare at the flour sacks, lined up neatly against the wall. You untie one. Carry it back to the base of the chute. Leave it upright, half open. A small offering, a white flag. And in the stillness that follows, the laughter fades. Not abruptly, slowly. Like it's walking away. You sit. You breathe. And somewhere upstairs, the footsteps begin again. But this time they walk away. You don't chase the footsteps. You don't call after them. You don't even exhale too loud. Because now you understand the unspoken rule that every medieval miller lived by. When something decides to leave, let it. The half-open sack you offered still sits beneath the chute, untouched, but somehow lighter, as if something invisible reached inside, took just enough, and moved on. Not greedy, just curious. or maybe polite in its own strange ancient way. You rest against the wall again. The grindstone is still, the gears idle, the waterwheel murmuring in the background like a lullaby from the river gods. The warmth has returned, a little. The frost is gone from the stone, and for the first time in hours, your shoulders lower. You think, just for a moment, that maybe it's over. And then you feel it. The stone beneath your feet pulses. A slow, subtle thud. Not a tremor, not a vibration. More like a heartbeat. One beat. Then nothing. Then again. You crouch down, press your palm to the wooden floorboards. There it is. Thump. Pause. Thump. Millers told tales of the stone heart, a condition that occurred in particularly old mills when the grindstone took on a kind of memory. Not of people, but of time, seasons, storms, failures, and sometimes loss. They said that if the heart began to beat, it meant the stone was waking up, not mechanically, spiritually. And if the stone woke, something would need to be fed. Not wheat, not flour, something living. You pull your hand away, suddenly aware that your palm is dusted, not just with flour, but something darker. You wipe it on your apron quickly, glance at the ledger, still closed. You consider writing your own note. Instead, you check the mill mechanisms again, looking for any signs of pressure buildup or gear slippage. Everything appears fine, but the hum in the air, the kind you feel in your jaw more than your ears, is back. You know it now. It's the sound of waiting. There's a story from Provence about a traveling millwright who entered an abandoned hilltop mill to repair a broken axle. He worked 3 days, alone. When the villagers climbed up to check on him, they found no man, just a series of tools laid in a perfect circle around the grindstone, all pointing inward. And in the center, a child's shoe. Fresh. The villagers sealed the door. Historians still argue whether this was a cautionary tale for workers traveling alone, or a metaphor for how industries consume generations. Or maybe just a story told by tired millers to explain what they couldn't name. You lean back against the beam, tapping your nail lightly against the wood. The rhythm is oddly satisfying, sharp, clean. You fall into a trance. Tap, tap, pause, tap, tap, pause. And then, from somewhere deep within the wall, 3 taps back. Not echoes, answers. You drop the nail. A gust of air moves through the mill, not strong, not cold, just sudden. Like the building exhaled. The door doesn't open. The shutters don't flap. But every flour sack rustles slightly, just once, and then stills. You don't say anything. Because this is what separates the amateur from the lifer. Some millers run when the air moves wrong. Some freeze. But the experienced ones, they acknowledge. You place your hand gently on the nearest flour sack and murmur, "You're welcome." And the heartbeat beneath your feet stops, just like that. Now you remember an old miller's rhyme, one you heard as a child, maybe, or dreamed once. It comes back to you now, unbidden, soft like a lullaby. If the grain is clean and the stone is fed, if you speak with care and you share your bread, then the mill will grind and the wheel will turn, and the voices inside will not ask to learn. It makes no sense, but it calms you. You rise slowly, stretch your arms, and glance at the upper loft. Still too quiet, but not watching. You sense that whatever was upstairs has retreated, or maybe just lost interest. And the flower doesn't breathe anymore, not in the way it did. The sacks are still. The air is still. Even the rope hoist seems limp, resting. You sweep again, just to keep your body moving. Sweep, breathe. Sweep, hum. The old routines matter, not for productivity, but for safety. In medieval mills, repetition wasn't boring. It was protective. Certain patterns of movement, specific songs, even how many times you walked around the grindstone, these were sacred habits. Talismans made from time, not objects. A German miller was once asked why he always clapped twice before opening the flower chute. He answered, "So it knows I'm me." Tonight, you understand. You check the chute. Empty. The grindstone. Cool. The wall. Silent. The ledger? Now open again. You step forward, cautiously, and read the newest note, written in handwriting not yours, but familiar now. You may rest, but not here. You blink. You were planning to doze, just for a minute. But now, you grab your coat, your bag, not running, just leaving with intention. You extinguish the lanterns one by one, listening to the mill exhale into shadow. You leave one candle lit by the flour sacks, an old gesture meant for whoever, or whatever, comes next. Then you step outside. The air is cold and wet and real. The stars shimmer through the mist, and the only sound you hear behind you is the soft, steady creak of a grindstone beginning to turn. The night swallows you in silence as you step away from the mill, boots pressing into the damp earth. The crunch of gravel underfoot is too loud, almost disrespectful against the hush that hangs over the field. You glance back once, just once, at the silhouette of the mill. Its shape against the moonlit clouds feels older than it should. Heavier, like it grew another story while you weren't looking. You walk home slowly. You don't run. That would be rude and foolish. Everyone knows that when you leave a haunted space, especially a mill, you never show your back in fear. You walk like you belong in the night, like the thing behind you is simply a building and not a stomach full of flour and ghosts. Halfway down the lane, you realize something. The smell of burnt bread is gone, and the mill's creak is no longer following you. No hum, no tapping, just crickets and wind and the faint gurgle of the stream, back to normal, back to small. And yet, as your house comes into view, you feel the mill is still watching, not with eyes, just with memory. Because mills remember. Millers across Europe knew this. Some even rotated jobs every 7 years to avoid becoming too familiar. They said if you ground too many years in one place, your soul blended with the stones. Not metaphorically, literally. You'd begin to dream of spinning, wake up with flour in your ears, taste wheat in your teeth even on fast days. One old superstition held that the grindstone could trap your name. That's why retiring millers sometimes changed theirs, just in case. You unlock your door, step inside, hang your coat. Your boots leave flower prints on the floor. Normal. You sweep them up without thinking, but the rhythm of the sweeping, step, drag, pivot, feels familiar. Too familiar. Like the mill taught it to you. You shake off the thought. Eat something. Bread, ironically. Old, crumbly, very unhaunted. You chew slowly, listening to the house creak in ways that homes are allowed to creak. No footsteps overhead, no bells, just the sigh of wood and time. You sleep and you dream. You're back in the mill, only this time it's empty. No sacks, no stone, just walls that stretch upward, impossibly high, with a rope hanging from nowhere. A voice calls down, not in words, but in the grind of flour and the squeal of turning gears. You wake up with the taste of salt in your mouth, maybe sweat, maybe something else. And under your pillow, 1 grain of wheat. You go back the next day. Of course you do, because the mill doesn't run itself, and you're not going to let a few flour footprints and a spectral bread scent ruin your livelihood. You're a professional. Plus, you left a half sack behind. You want to see if anything's touched it. The walk back is different this time. The mist is thinner. The sun's just rising, casting long pink lines through the trees. The mill looks normal again. Sleepy, like it stayed up too late and needs coffee. You enter cautiously, but nothing rushes to greet you. No knockings, no laughter. You check the sack, still half full, but the tie has been retied. Not like you do it. A different knot. A quiet one. You nod. You inspect the grindstone, the chute, the gears. All working. No resistance. You toss a handful of grain down, pull the lever. The stone turns smoothly. Too smoothly. You watch the flour begin to fall. Soft, slow, obedient. It seems quieter than usual. Like the whole mill is waiting to see how you'll behave this morning, whether you'll acknowledge it, whether you'll keep your promises. You do. You sweep, you hum. You keep your back to the wall. You light a candle and place it near the ledger. An offering. And when you flip open the book, a new line has appeared. In your own handwriting. The stones remember. You don't panic. You just turn the page. There's no new writing, just a flower handprint. Small, delicate, right in the center. You close the book, gently, and you begin your day. Because millers don't get days off. Not in the Middle Ages, not now, and especially not when the building starts to recognize your rhythm. Historians still argue whether any of this ever really happened, whether medieval mills were truly haunted, or whether a combination of overwork, dust inhalation, and extreme isolation created a kind of collective madness. They point to the repetitive movements, the dangerous machinery, the lack of ventilation. And sure, maybe that explains some of it. But then again, dust doesn't retie knots, and flour doesn't leave handprints. The week goes by quietly, mostly. You rise before dawn, walk the same path to the mill, grind your grain, sweep your flour, hum the same off-key tune. You speak gently to the stones. You leave one candle lit by the sacks each evening. You never sleep inside. And the mill behaves. No laughter, no footsteps overhead, no rogue scents of bread rising from thin air. The grindstone hums just as it should, warm, obedient, almost content. Almost. But then come the dreams. Every night now, you're back in the mill. Only, it's not your mill. Not exactly. The walls are too tall, the beams too many. The air is thick and golden, almost liquid. You move slowly through it, like wading through syrup. And always, in the center, the grindstone spins. Not grinding grain, but time. Memories. Maybe people. Sometimes you see flour falling upward, drifting into rafters that never end. Sometimes you hear your own footsteps, but they're not where you are. And sometimes, only sometimes, you see a figure standing by the chute. Not threatening, just waiting. You wake up with flour on your hands. You tell yourself it's nothing, just routine soaking into your brain. Still, you start sleeping with your boots on, just in case. On the 7th night, things shift again. You're midway through a grind when the stone stalls, not stops, stalls. A tiny shudder runs through the wood. You pause the chute, check the mechanism. Nothing's jammed. The belt is fine. The gear teeth clean. But the stone won't turn. You lean close, press your ear to it. You hear something. Not grinding, whispering, faint, like wind through grain, but deliberate. You back away. Millers used to say that when the stone whispers, you listen, but never answer. That's how it gets your voice. You light another candle. You take a break. You sweep. The whispering stops. And when you restart the chute, the grindstone resumes like nothing happened. That night, the ledger flips open on its own. You don't touch it. You just walk past, and the breeze, or something heavier, flutters the page. The newest note is smudged, rushed, less neat than before. Ask what it wants, but don't listen too long. You stare at the ink. You stare at the stone. You do neither. Instead, you go home and dream of flower clouds curling into shapes, some human, some almost. You start to wonder, who are the ghosts in a mill? Not spirits, maybe. Just residues, leftovers from all those years, all those hands, all those accidents. The mill isn't haunted in the traditional sense. It contains Miller's thoughts, fears, prayers, mistakes. There's a tale from Bohemia, an apprentice miller who forgot to thank the stones before shutting down for the night. The next morning, he opened the chute and found his name ground into the flour. No one else saw it. But he did. He never went back. Historians scoff. Flour hallucinations. Work stress. illiteracy plus folklore. But even the skeptics admit, mills were strange places. Half machine, half religious site. People didn't understand how they worked, and when people don't understand, they tell stories. You wipe down the stones with a new cloth. You murmur your thanks. You trace the same clockwise circle 3 times over the grain chute, just in case. And still, the air hums a little too loud behind your ear. One afternoon, a bird lands in the window. A blackbird. It watches you work, doesn't blink. You pause. The ledger flips open. The blackbird cocks its head. You walk over to the book. The ink is still drying. It's not the mill that wants something. You stare at the words. You turn around. The bird is gone. So is the grindstones' hum. Total silence. The kind of silence that presses inward, like a held breath. Then, a knock. Not from the wall, not from above, from inside the chute. You freeze. Another knock. Slow. Wet. Millers once warned about the full sack. A superstition that if the chute knocked while empty, it meant something had filled it from the other side. Not with grain, with intention. They'd burn the sack on the spot, say a prayer, start over. You open the chute slowly, just flour. But as it falls, it lands in a perfect circle. No splatter, no mess. Just a shape. You wipe it away and close the chute. You don't look back. You don't listen. You go about your cleaning, your rituals. You straighten the tools. You turn the handle once, then twice. Never 3 times. That's part of the code. You leave a new candle, slightly taller than the last. And the next morning, the flour tastes sweet. Not bad, just unfamiliar. You test a pinch on your tongue. Vanilla? No, not vanilla. Memory. You don't grind that day. Not because the chute is jammed or the stones stuck. No, mechanically, everything is perfect. Suspiciously so. The waterwheel spins with rhythmic grace. The gears turn like they've been oiled by ghosts themselves. But you feel it the moment you walk in. The mill is waiting. Not like it's bored, like it's expecting. You keep your distance from the grindstone, sweep around it instead, letting the broom handle glide close but never touch. The chute is silent, too silent. Even when empty, it usually breathes a bit, wood settling, flour dust shifting. Today, it feels sealed, listening. The ledger is open again. You didn't open it. This time the handwriting is crisp. No smudges. Perfectly centered on the page, in letters that aren't yours. You can ask now. You stare at it. And, because you've run out of clever ways to pretend none of this is happening, you say aloud, quietly, almost shy. What do you want? The mill doesn't answer. Not directly. But one of the sacks behind you bursts. Just a soft pop, like someone snapped a stitch, and flour pours out in a single heavy plume. You spin, coughing, trying to see through the cloud, but it clings to your eyes, your lungs. For a terrifying moment, you feel buried, and then it settles, revealing something on the floor. Not a message, Not a shape, just a footprint. Your size, pointing toward the grindstone. Millers told a tale in the north, Yorkshire maybe, about the mirror step. The idea that once the mill knew you well enough, it could mimic your presence. Not maliciously, just helpfully. It could finish your work, complete your sweep, even leave after you left. But if the mill began stepping for you, then the next step it took wouldn't belong to either of you. That was the last step. Some say the mirror step is what ended old lineages, that a miller would forget which foot was his and which was the mill's. You look at the print. You place your boot beside it. Identical. Of course. The grindstone turns slightly. You didn't touch it. Not fully, just enough to start its hum. A low whine, like a sigh. And then the bread smell returns. Strong, almost overwhelming. You stagger back. It's too sweet now, sickly, like dough left to rise too long in a room with no windows. It clings to your clothes, your skin, your teeth. You spit. Flour. Just flour. You reach for the nail, but it's not in your pocket anymore. Of course it's not. You scan the floor, the shelf, the walls. Nothing. Then you hear the bell. One chime. Then another. Not distant now. Right behind you. You turn slowly, heart thudding hard enough to shake dust from your collar. There's no one there. But the rope hoist is moving again. Not twisted this time. Lowering. Something invisible descending. You don't run. You should, but you don't. You've passed some invisible threshold. This is no longer a question of survival. It's a question of understanding. You approach the grindstone. The surface is spinning now, slow, like a coin deciding which side to fall on. You place your hand on it, and the hum stops. All of it stops. Silence. The mill exudes a kind of release, like it exhales through you. Your knees buckle slightly. You stay standing. Just. And then the ledger flips. You don't read it right away. You just know. This place has known you too long now. It doesn't want your soul or your work. It wants your attention, and you've given it. All of it. Finally, you glance at the page. The last message. Now you know. That's it. No demands, no curses, no ghostly riddles. Just a statement. Final. Flat. You run a hand along the nearest beam. It feels warmer. Familiar. You pat it once. A strange gesture of respect. Of farewell. You sweep the floor one last time. Flour, wood dust, whatever bits of memory remain. And then you step outside. The light is strange. Soft. Early afternoon? Late morning? You're not sure how long you were in there, but the air tastes clean. For the first time in weeks, you don't feel like you're being followed, or carried, or watched. Just walking. The path feels real beneath your feet. The stream murmurs without menace. The sky is just a sky. And the mill? It doesn't call after you. It just creaks once, like an old friend shifting in their chair. Back home, you wash your hands. The flour doesn't cling this time. And when you check your pillow that night, no wheat grain, no ash, no small handprints, just quiet. But the dreams, they don't stop. They just change. Now, you see other mills, hundreds of them, all turning, some in daylight, some in shadow. And in the center of each, just for a second, you see someone sweeping, humming, and then they turn, and it's you. So now, with the grindstones stilled and the sacks of flour resting quietly in their corners, let's step gently away from the mill. The air grows cooler now, softer, like mist settling into a field just before dawn. You walk a little slower, your steps lighter than before. No more bells, no more laughter, just the hush of night wrapping around you like an old wool blanket. You can feel the rhythm of your breath evening out, syncing with the gentle creak of wood you think you hear far in the distance. Though maybe it's only your own heartbeat, quieter now, slower. You're safe. Whatever the mill was, whatever it held or whispered or remembered, it's behind you. Not gone, no. Mills never really go away, but resting, waiting. Like the stones, they only move when asked to. And you've asked enough for now. Let your shoulders fall. Feel the weight of your day slide off like old flour from an apron. Let your thoughts drift, slow and steady, like water under the wheel. You did your work well.